Something I've been thinking a lot about lately is just how our personal tastes come to be. Because it feels to me like in the earliest days, which are maybe the most important days, it's just completely left up to chance. Eventually, we learn what we like and dislike, and we intentionally seek out things that we think that we'll like or will at least find interesting. But what if we follow that trail all the way back? Back to the beginning. How much did the first game that you ever played influence the games that you enjoy right now? Maybe that first game is still one of your all-time favorites, and maybe you didn't even choose that game on purpose, or without any thought whatsoever. The very first video game I ever played was Super Mario 64, and I would be the biggest liar if I said it didn't, to this day, influence my taste in games. The game as a hub level? Well, that's just like Peach's Castle, and I like that. But I also didn't choose for Mario 64 to be my first game ever. My cousins just had it at their house. The vast majority of my N64 library was picked up completely randomly by my parents from a pawn shop they'd stop at before picking me up from school. I had no idea when I'd be getting a new game or if it would be any good at all. There are very few games I remember getting on purpose, and off the top of my head, those would be Yoshi's Story and Chameleon Twist 2. Does that say something about me? Do I have a tongue thing? Anyways, it wasn't until the next generation of consoles, the GameCube and the PS2, that I was picking every game for myself and buying them with my allowance. And truth be told, the only two things I ever really paid attention to in deciding if I was interested in a game were, is it made by Nintendo, and does it have cool box art? Which brings us to Shadow of the Colossus. It sure wasn't made by Nintendo, so it must have been some pretty great box art that made me pick it up off the GameStop shelves on that fateful day. And, well, I remember it pretty clearly, and that's exactly what it was. It had a big monster on the box, so I thought, cool. Then I flipped it over and read the back of the box. I distinctly remember reading it over and imagining what kind of game it might be. I remember picturing what kind of JRPG towns I'd be visiting or interesting NPCs that I'd talk to. Having seen and imagined enough, I took the box to the counter, and the guy behind it remarked, "Oh man, the horse in this game is really annoying." I laughed it off. My allowance/chore money was so precious to me that I could be pretty easily talked out of most game purchases. Wasted money was a tragedy, and new games were a precious commodity. Having done my mind palacing on what I thought the game might be, I didn't want to be talked out of this one. On the way back home, I did that iconic new game thing that we all remember doing, which was reading the manual in the back of the car. And I still have the manual for this game, by the way, and it's pretty cool. It's sideways. Here's a strange ritual I did when I was a kid. I liked squeezing as much entertainment out of the start menu of games as I could, to make sure I wasn't leaving any potential entertainment behind once I hit new game. So I'd always sit on the start menu for a while to see if there was a secret movie, and the funny thing about Shadow of the Colossus is that it just starts cold with the opening cutscene of the game, and you actively have to skip it to get to the main menu. And then if you wait around long enough, it just plays it again. Once my two intro movies were done playing, the game truly began, and I don't think I've ever locked into what a game was doing as quickly as I did with Shadow of the Colossus. I was immediately taken by the vastness of the space I was dropped into, so I hopped on aggro and I headed off to the first Colossus. Uh-oh. That's not good. Okay, sorry, give me a sec. I gotta clean the disc. You know, this is actually exactly what happened that day during my very first play session. Does blowing on a disc actually work? I don't know. In any case, Aggro's #1 hater back at GameStop sold me a scratched disc, rendering my first ever play session with a game, well, unplayable. Alright, game's working again. So I asked very nicely for my parents to drive me all the way back to the one and only GameStop in town to hopefully swap the disc out for a usable one. And they did. Go parents. In the very short amount of time it took me to load the game up, watch the first cutscene, twice, and barely get to that first Colossus, I knew I had picked up something special, and I wasn't about to let a misused secondhand copy get in the way of whatever the rest of this experience was going to be. I think if you're on YouTube and you look around for Shadow of the Colossus videos, there's no shortage of great writing that's been done on how incredible the bosses are, and how the story is so sparse and yet still so impactful, how the morality of the tale and just how justified the main character Wander is for trying to do what he tries to do is truly a gray area that's left up to you to interpret. But I feel like the absolute vastness and simultaneous emptiness of the world of the game, while usually mentioned and talked about, has never been fully reckoned with in a way that I've been satisfied with. There's a certain variety of open world game that always seems to rub some people the wrong way and that I inevitably end up really vibing with, and that's open worlds with empty space. I think Shadow of the Colossus is culturally thought of as an art game, so the map having more or less nothing in it is kind of accepted as an artistic choice, but when larger, more popular releases try something similar, I always see them getting derided for it. I'm thinking specifically of games like Breath of the Wild and Final Fantasy 15. I think if we were to place those two games on the same spectrum of cultural perception, where Shadow of the Colossus falls on the it's an art game side, I think these two would be much further towards the it's a video game that should do video game things side. And truth be told, Breath of the Wild and FF15 have some of my favorite open world maps ever, and the supposed emptiness played a big part in that. I've wanted to interrogate why emptiness bothers some players so much for a while now. It seems like a pretty simple question with an easy answer, right? Why do people dislike empty spaces in games? It's because there's nothing to do there. And if you're not doing something in a game, then you must not be playing it, right? The space isn't being used. So then, what's the solution? Do we put a chest there, an enemy, a puzzle, an NPC? Does putting something there justify the space? Does a space need to be justified to exist? I talked about something like this in my Animal Crossing video, and just to summarize the point I made, I don't like new Animal Crossing as much as old Animal Crossing because it feels like it's presenting you with a blank canvas for you to paint on and make the space your own. Whereas in old Animal Crossing, the space felt like it already existed before you got there, and your only task was to try and exist in it alongside it. New Animal Crossing says, give this land purpose. Old Animal Crossing says, find your purpose for being here. And if the town in OG Animal Crossing felt like it already existed before you got there, then the Forbidden Lands of Shadow of the Colossus take that feeling to a massive, incomprehensible scale. When you step foot in them, it's impossible not to hear that massive, inaudible question blasted at you on every whisper of the wind. Why are you here? I think if some players see an empty space and see a lack of purpose in that space, then Shadow of the Colossus is actually in conversation with that. You see, so much of the online fandom for this game in the early days was focused on one single thing, the existence of a hidden Colossus. To this day, the mythical 17th Colossus acts as a kind of seeing Jesus in a piece of toast joke for the fans of the game. There were, and still are, entire YouTube channels dedicated to scrubbing over every single pixel of the game to find some evidence that a secret boss existed. All this empty space begged to be pored over, and gamers happily did so. The dead ends that personally drove me crazy in the game were the entrance to the Forbidden Lands itself, which just kinda unceremoniously blows you to safety when you try to leave, and the top of the central temple in the game, which is incredibly difficult to climb to. When you do, your only reward is a fruit that actively reduces your max HP, permanently. To me, it felt like the developers put just enough in each location for me to feel like there was more there. Why make a weird wind interaction at the entrance instead of a more pedestrian, invisible wall? That makes it feel vaguely more in-universe and therefore somehow passable. Why put fruit that kills you at the top of the temple instead of just nothing? That makes me feel like there's a good fruit if I maybe just climb a little higher. This creates a double-edged thought. Everywhere I go, all this empty space has no purpose that I've been able to find, but that makes me feel like it does, in fact, have a purpose. Because how could it not? I recently found from a pretty unlikely source a study that delved into the relationship between children completing tasks and being rewarded for them. The study looked at kids that already enjoyed reading books. They don't need to be told to, it's fun for them as an activity in and of itself. So then, the people conducting the study began rewarding those kids who already enjoyed reading books for reading those books. So, if you finish one book, you get $5, and if you finish two, you get a pizza. That kind of thing. And what I found is that if you try to add incentive to an activity that children already enjoy doing, it stresses them the hell out. Adding an end reward to an intrinsically enjoyable activity turned that activity into a chore. Before it was, I am reading a book and I am having fun. Now it's, I need to finish this book to get that trophy. I remember experiencing this exact phenomena in Microcosm when I played Midnight Club 3 back on the PS2. That game features a huge open world to drive around in, but outside of the actual races, there's really no other activities to complete. But I'd still drive around for hours, just having fun and exploring the city and blasting the amazing soundtrack. There were no objectives to pull me from point to point or collectibles to... Wait. Oh no. That's right. Finally, after hours of exploring, I finally peeked around the right corner, and I saw it. A collectible. I remember just having this sinking feeling, this feeling that said, the game just gave you something to do. Now, if I'm driving around and not finding these things, I'm playing suboptimally. So I joylessly grabbed the collectible and basically made a pact with myself then and there to ignore what I saw. I think about rewards a lot when I play Shadow of the Colossus. I imagine a version of the game that gives you trophies each time you visit a new area. Or maybe there's NPCs dotted around the map that give you a little lore dump when you talk to them. The reason Mario games feel so bursting with life is that the devs find every little nook and cranny to put little surprises in. So when you go off the beaten path, you feel rewarded for doing so. And like the devs are giving you a little wink, little treats that say, we put this here for you, we knew you'd find it, and you did. Good job. Each and every time you go off into one of Shadow of the Colossus's many tucked away nooks or crannies, you're met with the same thing. Silence. It almost begins to feel as if the developers don't know about the places you're finding, or at the very least didn't expect you to find it. And isn't that exciting? For some reason, an implied purpose feels so much grander than an explicit one. One of the many mistakes I made throughout my college years was saving the bulk of my general education classes for my final semester or so, which meant that I spent most of my last 6 months of education in classes I didn't really care about and probably should have gotten out of the way years before. And one of those classes was Geography 101. I remember signing up for the class thinking, I'm going to die of boredom, and that is how I'm going to die. Given the fact that I'm now talking about that class many years later in a YouTube video that I'm making just because I kind of want to, I obviously ended up being very, very wrong. On one of the first days of class, the professor pulled up a map of the world and pointed to a spot dead in the middle of the ocean. Anybody know what this is? He asked. Confused side eyes and head shakes from the class. He explained to us that that spot on the map was the furthest you could be on Earth from any landmass. He said it was a dream of his to one day go there because he was, quote, addicted to feeling small. What a thing for a geography professor to say. It took me a while to understand exactly what he meant by this, and even longer to figure out that I'm exactly the same way. And in some fashion, that started with Shadow of the Colossus. One of the things that helped me realize this was moving from a big city to an even bigger city. Almost exactly a year ago, I moved from Phoenix, Arizona to Los Angeles, California, which is almost as perfect a simile for hopping from Shadow of the Colossus to Assassin's Creed as I could possibly hope for. Los Angeles is a suffocating city. There's just so much of it. Every single square foot of the city is there for a reason. It has a purpose, or at least it used to have a purpose and then got repurposed. It sort of feels like if you broke through the crust of the city, you'd find another one underneath it, and I find that to be exhausting. To live in LA is to be surrounded at all times. But all this busyness doesn't make me feel small, it makes me feel like I don't exist, like there's no room for me. I'm swallowed up by it. In stark contrast, a year ago, I lived quite literally at the edge of civilization. I would occasionally go up to my roof to look out at the desert, and you could so clearly see the exact point where city ended and desert began, where humans said, alright, that's enough. Or at least, that'll do for now. And the incredible thing about looking at that dividing line, that contrast, is that the desert made this massive man-made city look small. Look at all the concrete and metal the humans had to pour years upon years of effort into, only for the desert to still be infinitely larger. I think the sense of awe that people feel when they take in the ocean or the Grand Canyon is the feeling of something that huge just existing. You suddenly feel at once a participant and intruder. It's nature staring you dead in the eyes and asking, wait a minute, what are you doing here? And I don't know if I've ever had a good answer. The busier a space, the easier it is to say, oh, I'm here to do thing. Just collecting thing. Oh, I'm having a great time looking at thing. Don't worry, I assure you I can tackle thing 1 with plenty of time to also do thing 2. But when all of that is gone, you just have to sit with yourself. You can no longer busy yourself with thing. The mere justification of your existence is now in question by the audacity of your presence. But to me, that's not a scary feeling. That's one of the most exciting feelings in the world. Shadow of the Colossus taught me the value in space that isn't so loudly about something. Space that serves no purpose and yet endures seemingly eternally while the works of humans, so infused with intent as they are, crumble around it. To exist without purpose is not meaninglessness, it's the natural state of things. We can build our sprawling, multi-layered cities of steel and stone, but nothing will ever get us away from that fact. The fact that one day, we'll crumble along with them.